Licio,
Here.
Tabit,
Here.
Ward,
Here.
Olson.
Here. Got a full plate here, so we'll dive right in. Brad, you want to start us out?
Sure. The first item on the agenda is a agenda setting discussion. As council may recall, at the February 16th meeting, Councilmember Ward requested that this item be placed on a work session for discussion. Included in your packet is a written, but what I have written down as the unwritten practice that the city of Baxter has been doing well before my tenure here, had it reviewed by department heads, and they concurred that that is the practice. Time has been, as I indicated, time has been set aside during the work session to talk about this. Being that Council Member Ward brought this up, I would defer the floor to Council Member Ward.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is that okay?
You betcha.
Okay. So, Mayor and councilors, staff, this all came about when, I was first elected and I went through some orientation training with a number of staff, and one of them was with Brad. And then after I was sworn in, I asked about an agenda item. I received several calls from several constituents and was wondering how to place an agenda item. And he told me that the unwritten policy was to bring it up under council comments. It would go under, under council comments, and then either the mayor could approve that or another councilor could approve that, and then it would move to a work session. And then we could have a discussion at a work session about it. And so I said to him, you mean I have to have somebody else say that it was okay to have an agenda item, something that was brought to me by a constituent? And if it wasn't okay with any other person, any other councilor or mayor, the mayor or any other council member, that it would not be on, it would not be an agenda item, it would not be an item of discussion. And he said, yes, that's how it's been unwritten. I asked how many times that has happened. He stated that in his tenure, never. And maybe it has never happened. I'm still at loss as to, that unwritten policy. So I've done some investigation, some research. You received an email from me from an attorney at the League of Minnesota Cities. I've also talked to a number of cities around the state, outstate, northern, central, southern Minnesota, about their agenda process. And most of the processes allow for have a council member or a mayor, obviously, bring an agenda item to the city administrator, who then either puts it into a work session or an agenda item for further discussion or whatever. So I guess two questions. Enlighten me as to why what the current process is, and secondly, as I had a discussion with Kevin, attorney at League of Minnesota Cities, and I saw that in other cities, they suggest that no matter what the process is, that it not be unwritten policy, but it be a written policy. So first, enlighten me as to why a person that's elected that may have a constituent service discussion on an agenda item, why that needs approval of another elected official.
Well, I'll jump in. Like Mark's been here a little longer too, and first of all, it's never been a problem. You already said that, I realize, and a few years back, there was an issue with a council member that liked to throw a lot of stuff on the agenda that, I'm going to be honest with you, nobody else cared about, and so we spent a lot of time talking about things that were only relevant to that individual. And so I think the process, unwritten or written, was that you need to find out if anybody else is interested in that particular instance. John, we all get phone calls, and they're not necessarily agenda worthy. Most of them can be taken care of with the phone call, or you line the people up with the department head who has that portfolio. 99% of the time it gets taken care of. Now, at the same time, if something comes up during council comments that the council thinks, yeah, that is something that's probably relevant to a lot of people, let's do that. Let's put that on the agenda and we'll show up next meeting and discuss it. That is how it has happened a few times, but this has not been an overwhelming problem. So kind of interested in why it is now. I did notice that in the examples that were given to us, both by you and by Brad, that a preponderance of those councils were already doing the same thing. The subject came up at a council comment time, and then if there were 2 people, 3 people that agreed with that, it got thrown onto an upcoming agenda. So it doesn't sound like it was really unheard of or rare. In a lot of cases, they were doing that. I was reading Rochester's; they were even stricter than stricter is the wrong word, but even more defined, I guess, even than what we were doing. First of all, I'm interested in knowing what the rest of the people think. A couple of you have been here for over 2 years. I don't know if you've come across this as being a problem. Mark, a little bit longer. I certainly haven't. The council comments, as far as anybody being censored or restricted, that's really not accurate. Council comments, people have the opportunity to say whatever they want. And if they think it's worthy of going further, council goes along with it. It was never meant to be a dictatorship. That was not the case at all. I think that the idea was to, if we're going to start slapping every phone call on the agenda, we'll never get anything done. And a lot of it doesn't need to be, it doesn't reach that level. But anyway, I'm open to hear what the rest of you have to say.
Well, I think Mayor and Council, every time I've gotten a phone call or an email, if I didn't have the answer, which was the majority of the time, I would typically reach out to City Administrator Chapoulis or Mayor Olson or the department head, and it would be forwarded to them. And 99.9% of the time, they would have the information, and then either they would share that with me and I would contact the constituent, or they would directly contact that person as well. And at least from my limited experience, I haven't had issues.
I'll just mention that's been similar to my experience. I wouldn't have any problem with formalizing the policy.
No, I wouldn't either.
I guess I like the idea of written. If it's our policy, I have no problem writing it down. But I do think that so far it's worked fine in my experience as well.
Yeah, I have to agree with what everyone said so far. I'm happy to put it into writing. Haven't had any problems before. I will go back to what Darryl was saying. We did have one council member at one point that every time they got to the microphone, it was, well, I had a number of constituents call me. I mean, it was 2 or 3 times per meeting and every little thing. So I agree with the mayor, and we need to make sure that we don't necessarily put everything on the agenda that can be dealt with by a simple call to staff or council on that side of it. So that's my opinion.
Well, let me thank you for enlightening me and educating me. Let me just say, Mayor, you called it a problem. I'm not saying it's a problem. I never said it was a problem. I'm trying to have open communication, and especially from constituents. And I understand previous problems, for the lack of a better word, I guess, as we're talking about problems. I don't see that as, I don't see myself as a problem or going forward or whatever. I know the difference between bringing a constituent, taking care of a constituent through phone calls, which I think Brad and others on the staff could also say that I've done that a number of times as well, without bringing it forward. My, Mark and Zach and Connie and Mayor Olson, the fact of the matter is we are all elected and represent, the citizens of the city of Baxter. And if there is someone that is passionate about something that they want discussed at a council meeting, I, for one, think that's our job. That's our duty. That's our responsibility, period. No matter if we agree or don't agree or whatever, because those constituents are the folks that we all represent. It's interesting to me that the League of Minnesota Cities, in their own mayor's handbook, has suggested, not in the mayor's handbook, their own staff suggest that the policy be a written policy. And so I would hope that maybe from this discussion, we would at least have ask the staff to put together some kind of a written policy about placing an item on the agenda or whatever. And if it's past practice, so be it. And I would any counselor or mayor that brings something forward, I think is worthwhile. I understand some folks may be being overbearing in their requests, and as it sounds like has been a problem in the past. But having said that, to shorten this discussion, I would like to propose that we have the staff put together some kind of written policy for putting things on the agenda and moving forward with it. And if I need to make a motion to do that, I'll do that.
Yeah. First of all, John, I have no problem with put it in writing. And the only reason we haven't done it is because it hasn't come up, to be real honest with you. It didn't seem like it needed that kind of attention, but I'm certainly have no problem with that at all. I would ask you a question though, and I'm just trying to figure this thing out. What part of it do you think is broken? Just the fact that it's not in writing, or?
Well, like I said, I have past experience being elected official in a number of positions as well, and I don't ever recall having to have. That's not true. Sometimes you do go out and lobby for a cause, for a purpose, for an issue or whatever, and so you can do that. You can, what I would call lobby, or I would call Council Licio or Mayor Olson or Councilor Cross or Councilor Tabbitt and say, I'd like to bring this issue forward, and could I ask for your support or whatever? And they'd tell me yes or no, yay or nay or whatever. And again, Mayor, I don't see this as a problem. I don't see this as broken. I don't see it anything other than clarifying for a new counselor the process of putting an agenda item on the agenda.
Gotcha.
So that's exactly why I have brought it up and talked about it and looked into it.
Totally agree. I totally agree with that. I just want to clarify one more thing though, that what has happened in the past is if a council member brings something up during their council comments and they say, I've been approached by people on this. I think this is something we should, I can't think of a time that was ever denied where we didn't say, yeah, let's put that on an agenda and let's talk about that. I kind of relate it to when people show up for open forum and they get up and they make accusations or they actually have facts. It's a policy that we don't react that night. We listen. That's what public comments are for. And then we tell them, we think that's a valid point. City administrator, get with these people, or if it needs to be put on an agenda, do that. And I think we've done that. I don't think that we've ever, but it's kind of, to me, it's kind of the same scenario where we don't get into a debate, or it's not, for one thing, it's not fair because nobody's had a chance to research and that type of a thing. But I have no problem. It sounds like nobody else has a problem with putting it in writing, and we can fine tune it and tweak it after we see what they bring forward. So no problem with that at all, John.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for your time and your diligence. And let me see if I can make my computer work here. Okay, we're moving on to the 2021 Mill and Overlay and Full Depth Reclamation Improvements Project, whoever's running with that.
Mayor, Council, as you recall, at the last meeting, we tabled action on accepting of the feasibility report and approving the plans and moving forward with the project to allow Widseth and our engineering staff to provide answers to the questions that were asked. And at this time, I believe we're prepared to talk about that. So at this point in time, I'll turn it over to Eric to go over with his findings.
Hi, Mayor and Council. This is Eric Welch from Widseth. Yeah, at the last meeting, we went through the feasibility study for the 2021 street improvements project, and that was tabled, like the administrator said, to gather additional information. One of the main items we discussed was narrowing of aisle drive to save on project costs and assessments, and then also future maintenance costs on the roadway. We did determine that aisle drive could be narrowed from 44 feet to 38 feet wide while still meeting state aid standards. The existing roadway would have 11-foot travel lanes, a 12-foot center turn lane, and then 2-foot gutters. The narrower roadway would have a construction cost, it wouldn't necessarily be a cheaper, it's not necessarily cheaper to construct. Let me start over again. I'm getting all confused here, but a narrower roadway is cheaper to construct, but not necessarily cheaper to reconstruct. The initial cost savings for just reconstructing the roadway would be $15,000 just because we are narrowing the roadway. However, the cost to modify the storm sewer to meet the requirements of that narrower roadway would be about $100,000. So we'd be looking at about an $85,000 net increase in cost to go from 44 feet wide to 38 feet wide. Looking in the future, if we did narrow the roadway, that would reduce our future maintenance costs on the roadway. For example, if we go to from a 44-foot wide roadway to a 38-foot wide roadway, we would save about $25,000 in today's dollars for a future mill and overlay project. But when you look at the $85,000 spent to do the initial project, it would take about 60 years or over 3 mill and inlay projects to make up that difference. Narrowing the roadway would also negatively affect the project schedule. If we proceed with the project as planned, we'd be looking at construction starting just after the 4th of July weekend and then ending around the middle of September. If the council decides to narrow the roadway and still proceed with the project this year, it would push that schedule out about another month. And possibly, be looking at postponing the project because we wouldn't be getting done with construction until the end of October. There are some negatives with not proceeding with the project this year. One of those is that College Road and Aisle Drive are in really rough shape and in need of constant patching. City staff has already patched College Road 3 times and Aisle Drive once this year. City staff has determined the most cost-effective and safest way to patch the streets is to hire a contractor and to apply a material called poly patch. This type of patch is more effective and lasts longer than what city staff can do, but it still only lasts about 1 year. And the cost to do that patching for 2021 would be about $92,000. So there still is a cost associated with maintaining that roadway, even if the city decides to put the project off for another year. Another negative is just a delay. Another negative delaying the project is just the buildup of projects for construction in 2021, or excuse me, construction for 2022. Right now, we're looking at College Road and Aisle Drive this year, but when we add that to projects next year, which include Design Drive, Universal Drive, Fairview Road, Glory Road, Englewood Drive, Foley Road, Fourth and Road, and then the Knollwood Drive improvements, that's a significant workload that the city staff would have to contend with. This year's project is about $2.7 million. If we push everything off until next year, that's over $10 million worth of work. So there is a concern that, just, tearing up the entire town to do that amount of work in 1 year. And then, like I said, just the stress and workload on city staff to do that work. At the last meeting, there was some discussion too on possibly revisiting some of the city's priorities and policies. Some of the documents used by the city to guide improvement projects include the comprehensive plan, the ADA transition plan, and bicycle and pedestrian policy. The comprehensive plan was last updated in 2015. The document serves as a guide for long-range development of the city. Some of the areas of the plan that can help with reviewing street projects includes existing and future zoning, identification of redevelopment growth areas, and transportation planning. Zoning in the project area is currently a combination of office, service, and regional commercial. There's also a significant amount of undeveloped property to the west of the project area, kind of along that Falcon Road future roadway corridor, and then south along Isle Drive, just south of the Centric Clinic. And this area is going to continue to grow and expand over the next 20 years. When looking at the plan, we see that Isle Drive is classified as a major collector and one of the busiest roadways in town. We estimate the current traffic count at about 4,500 vehicles per day. And then any changes to the design and width of the roadway should be considered, carefully, because Isle Drive is an important corridor and it serves as a parallel roadway for Trunk Highway 371. And then the ADA transition plan that was adopted by the city in 2017. It's a requirement of the Americans with Disabilities Act that was enacted in 1990. In accordance with Title II of that act, the city was required to complete a self-evaluation of all pedestrian facilities located within the right-of-way. That included the evaluation of about 324 curb ramps, 24.4 miles of trail, and 15 traffic signals. We found about 66% of the curb ramps were non-compliant and in need of reconstruction, and that includes all of the curb ramps in the Isle Drive corridor, the project area for Isle Drive. The city set a goal in that plan of reconstructing about 20% of the non-compliant facilities every 5 years. This is mainly done by completing this work in conjunction with planned street projects. And by not, continuing with the street projects, we kind of put that plan into jeopardy. And that was a publicly published plan with a schedule. And every year that gets pushed off, it puts that schedule in jeopardy and may also jeopardize, possible future federal funding for any projects that the city would get. And then the last document is the bicycle and pedestrian policy study. That was completed in 2019. The policy outlines how these facilities should be modified and developed within the city. Isle Drive currently has a separated shared use path, and the policy states that streets with traffic counts between 1,000 and 9,000 should include bike lanes. So if you're strictly looking at this policy and the traffic count on Isle Drive, it would kind of direct the council to look at, actually widening the road and putting in bicycle and pedestrian, lanes on this roadway. So there's some competing issues with these guidance documents, and probably maybe a good idea for council to consider revisiting these documents at some time to kind of guide how these projects are continued in the future. We talked last time about narrowing these roadways up to save on costs, but it doesn't always necessarily follow the guidance documents that are currently used by the city. So in summary, again, just going back to the costs, like I said, it's going to take about 60 years and 3 million inlay cycles just to make up that cost difference from narrowing up the roadway. And there's also a significant impact on the schedule. Just the time necessary to redo the feasibility study and redo the plans is going to push everything back about a month. You wouldn't be looking at getting done with construction until probably the end of October. So that's kind of just a quick summary of the memo that was prepared with the help of city staff. So at this time, I'll just open it up for any questions you have.
Okay, council, it's the time for hard questions, easy questions. What are your thoughts about this whole scenario here? Mark?
Yes, I think we got the answers that we were looking for. I kind of had a feeling that the amount of money that we'd save from just narrower blacktop would not at all offset the cost of what storm sewer realignments would be. So I guess with what I've heard so far, I don't have any questions about the supporting documents that we use for design. So we've been using, and I'd be in favor of moving forward on the project.
I would.
Hear from others?
I would agree with that. I guess I didn't hear any reason why we shouldn't, based on what's in the report.
John or Zach?
When I read the report, thank you for doing the report, by the way, Eric and your group. And there was some compelling evidence that, just as two previous counselors said, for us to move ahead as planned. Although, Zach, I appreciate your willingness to bring forward possible money savings and things. That's not going to happen. So it doesn't appear that it's going to happen. No, it's not going to happen. So I would say let's move forward as proposed.
I'll just say thanks to staff and the engineers for answering the question. That was all I was looking for. I do think bigger picture, I'd love to go through some of those plan documents that you referenced. Yeah, I think that's for another day, but that was really what I was getting at, was if we're defaulting to something that is wider than what would serve our purposes, I think we should look back that step. I don't want to dig into design features of any individual project, but go to that policy level and talk about it that way, so that we're, to the reference point of theoretically we should actually widen the road. I have to say that I would very much disagree with our own policy in that sense, in that road already has enough room for all the uses we need, plus a separated trail. So maybe looking at those would be wise for the future here before we have other projects and I guess to that whole question, and where it's good to see that we looked at it and all that, but it doesn't probably do us any good on a mill and overlay type deal. But the next project where we're actually constructing a road, I'd just like to see the policy fit or have us had discussed the policy so that we all know that it's what this council all kind of agrees we want to move forward with.
Well, thanks everybody for your comments. These are big things, and I know they weigh heavy on us. And I know I've been vacillating back and forth, had discussions with staff myself also. But I think the thing that I'm really disappointed in all of us, I guess, but let me just say this. I'm hearing some rumblings that maybe the complete streets thing needs to be relooked at. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not what this new group thinks it should be. Can you hear me? My screen just disappeared again.
Yes.
Okay. I can't see you, but as long as you can hear me. The complete street thing maybe should be looked at again. I think that what I'm hearing from some is that we're maybe putting too much asphalt down, which causes us, some pain and suffering later on. It causes a higher assessment, causes, all the money parts of that. And so maybe that needs to be looked at. Our contracted engineers, when they are designing roads and putting cost estimates together, they're using what we gave them, and those were the criteria at that time. But maybe they're not the criteria anymore. So I agree that we should probably have those discussions. Another thing that came up was that maybe obviously the assessments are high, and we haven't done necessarily a break, quote unquote, for commercial properties. Maybe that should be looked at now. Well, here we are. We're at the 11th hour. We haven't had that discussion. I realize we still can, but those are discussions that, to me, should have been happening, some time ago. The timing also worries me. If we go forward, it's expensive. If we don't do it, it's expensive. If we prolong it, we get back into another Forest Views thing where we're trying to finish up a project with the snow is flying, and that's ugly. We don't want to do that either. So I guess, the final analysis is that we should have been talking sooner. Woulda, shoulda, coulda, I realize that. But moving forward, I think very, very quickly moving forward, we should have some of these discussions that, that I just mentioned. It looks like there's a consensus, though, that to go ahead and move on. Brad, if we get to, we haven't had an assessment hearing, and if there's some discussion about what we can do with that, that could still happen. Is that correct?
Correct. If the council is supportive of the items that are on the regular meeting agenda, the items that were tabled last meeting, we would follow the schedule that Eric had included in his memo. There will be an improvement hearing that will need to take place. Eric, I don't have it in front of me. When is that tentatively scheduled?
It's scheduled for Thursday, April 1st.
So we would have that meeting on April 1st with receiving comments, and the following council meeting will be when the council makes a determination as to either proceed with the project or not. So that would be I don't know if I'm answering your question, Mayor, but that would be the kind of the next steps with the project.
Yeah, I think so. So if I'm reading people and hearing correctly, it sounds like we have consensus then to on this project anyway, move forward. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We will move on then to number 5, updating the pavement management program. Whoever's going to run with that.
Sure, I'll just do a quick introduction. As council may recall, during the conversation at the last council meeting, Public Works Director Walter indicated some findings that he and his colleagues throughout the state have found in regards to chip sealing, which would lead to the need to review our pavement management program, specifically related to chip sealing. We do have representation from Bolton and Mink to provide council with a presentation as to the pavement management program and some of the findings related to the engineering profession and kind of the next steps. So with that, Trevor, I don't know if you have anything to add or if you want to introduce Brian.
I really don't have anything to ask. I think we'll just turn it over to Brian to go through what his proposals are that are on the regular council agenda under consent. He's got 2 proposals on there, and I'll just turn it over to Brian to explain both of them and kind of what we're going to be looking at for the coming weeks on our pavement management program.
Is my screen, can you see the presentation up on the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Brian Drown with Bolton and Mink. And I'll, as has been said, we'll be going through this presentation on pavement management and chip sealing. We'll be talking just the overview of the program to give some background on the history of that. The seal coat or chip seal program portion of that, stripping that we're seeing within the city, some recent research done by the MnDOT local road research board, ramifications to your plan, and then update to your plan. Program overview. This program was created in 2013. Purpose was to preserve and perpetuate existing city-owned and municipal state aid streets and their pavements in a fiscally responsible manner, correct pavement deficiency and slow the rate of pavement deterioration, consider immediate and long-term needs of existing local street pavements, coordinate the maintenance and rehab with planned utility repairs and redevelopment, and then also provide information for better informed and involved decision-making. As part of that, each street every 3 years has been rated on a 1 to 10 basis using the Pacer rating system, with 10 being a newly paved street and 1 basically a failed or pavement that needs to be reconstructed. Using that 1 to 10 rating system, maintenance, rehab, and reconstruction activities were identified, with seal coating being a strategy on 9s and 10s or newer pavements, crack and route sealing, and patching and seal coating for 6, 7, and 8s, 5s and 6s, getting out of that maintenance activities to extend pavement life to a mill and overlay, 3s and 4s, which are aged and pavements seeing quite a bit of distress, to full depth reclamations, and then 1s and 2s are in need of total reconstruction. Just for background, just some illustrations of what these different items look like, with the seal coat basically being oil or an emulsion put down, followed by a layer of chips, and then another layer of oil to seal that. Mill and overlay, basically just milling or removing a portion of the pavement surface and placing new pavement. When we say full depth reclamation, it's actually a machine that comes in and grinds up or pulverizes the existing pavement with a portion of the class 5 underneath it. That material used as base material, and then new pavement placed over the top. And then full reconstruction is basically excavation and rebuilding of the entire street section of the subgrade class 5 and new pavement. In 2016, the plan was updated to utilize a 7-year rotation to allow for maintenance and rehabilitation to be focused in one area of the city. The 7-year cycle was chosen based on the preventative maintenance research that shows that roads in good condition could be seal coated every 5 to 7 years. And based on this, the city was divided into 7 management areas of comparable size and divided along physical boundaries where possible. Using the Pacer ratings, a weighted overall rating was established for each area. Rehab projects were programmed in those areas with the greatest amount of poor pavement, basically with the rehabilitation or mill and overlays or full depth reclamations to attack some of the areas that had the most amount of, I'll say, bad pavements in them. And then preventative maintenance, the crack filling and seal coating were programmed in those same respective areas to follow 3 years later. In 2017, the program was again updated to utilize full depth reclamation instead of mill and overlay for commercial and industrial streets, as some of the streets that had been mill and overlaid with a high amount of traffic and commercial traffic had seen some of that reflective cracking come through in a relative short amount of time. Here's a layout of the 7 areas within the city, and again, after 16, and to group projects in these areas to address the needs within those areas, to group for economy of scale with projects, and also spread improvements evenly throughout the city. The maintenance program overview was to basically, as the pavement deteriorates, hit it with the seal coat or the maintenance activity to bring it back to the desired pavement surface, and to be able to do that multiple times to maintain the pavement surface and to extend the life before the condition falls to where it would need a rehabilitation or a reconstruction activity. As part of that, a seal coat or a chip seal program, again, was identified as a maintenance activity. This is the surface application of oil followed by the placement of a small graded aggregate. In our case, a crushed granite. And the purpose of this is to seal the pavement surface from the effects of moisture, and then also add friction or seal up the surface of the street. Here's just a couple photos of the process with the oil being put down, and then a spreader with chip following right behind that. Once the chip is laid, it's rolled, and to press that aggregate down into the oil to bond, and then loose chips are swept up and removed, and then a few days following, a fog seal or a thin layer of oil is placed over the chip to seal that chip to the street, and just to make sure that there's not a lot of chip flaking off or getting into storm sewers and such. The city did complete seal coat projects in 14, 15, 16, and 17 as part of the pavement management plan. In total, just under 30 miles or 35% of your 84 miles in your system have been seal coated. With 2014, just over 8 miles, 15 and 16, about 5.5 miles, and then 2017, 10.7 miles. Here are maps showing the streets that have been seal coated. 2014, again, before the program was updated to group into sections, quite a few streets throughout the city in different locations. This being Highland Scenic, Knollwood, up to 210 in that residential area, the residential area along Knollwood, north of 210, Cedar Scenic, Mountain Ash, Knollwood past Eagle View Elementary, some residential areas just west of the commercial area, Design Drive, portion of Golf Course and Fairview Drive, portion of College Road, and a portion of Evergreen Drive. 2015, again, seal coating kind of throughout the city with 5.5 miles, the remaining portion of Cedar Scenic, residential neighborhood, portion of Isle Drive, Industrial Park Road, and some more streets in the industrial park. 2016 was when the seal coating was confined to one management area, and so basically the some of the residential areas west of 371, east of Englewood, and south of Woida. 2017, there was a large portion, mainly of commercial and industrial roads along the 371 corridor, Golf Course Drive, Cypress Drive, and portions of Excelsior Drive. Following the 2016 project, deterioration of the underlying pavement or stripping was observed on a few streets that had been seal coated, particularly Knollwood Drive, south of Highland Scenic to Forest View Middle School, and Cedar Scenic west of Memorywood Drive. Stripping has been identified at smaller areas throughout the city that have been addressed by milling and patching as part of the 2019 city street rehab project. And as these areas have popped up and been identified, City has not chosen to implement seal coating in 2018, 19, or 20. March, a couple weeks ago, in areas were identified with more stripping. I have some maps from each year identifying those areas. Following this slide, in general, streets that were seal coated in 16 and 17 are exhibiting the least amount of stripping, with about 5% we estimate seeing this sort of surface deterioration. We are seeing more prevalent stripping in those that were seal coated in 2014 and 15, particularly Cedar Scenic, that, as was mentioned, from Oakwood to Memorywood, Knollwood Drive, north of 210 up to Donald Street, Timber Lane Drive, east of Knollwood Drive, Isle Drive, from Falcon to Glory Road, that was just discussed previously, and then College Road from Cypress Drive to Conifer. In these areas, we estimate that over half the length of these streets are exhibiting some sort or degree of stripping, and this spring is showing more evidence that the underlying stripping or deterioration is becoming more prevalent. Here's just some notes. In red are the areas that, with that investigation on March 2nd, of areas that are exhibiting some sort of stripping under the seal code. Again, 2015, probably the west portion of Cedar Scenic is exhibiting the most, and then some smaller areas in the residential area and along Edgewood, Dellwood, and then Berrywood. 16 and 17, not as severe, again, about 5% at this point is what we're seeing, particularly at intersections and along some of the pavement markings. Here's just some photos of kind of what it looks like. This top left photo is actually on Cedar Scenic. These have deteriorated, creating small potholes. This has been spray patched by city staff in the past, and where you see these dark colors is where we're anticipating that there's underlying deterioration that's happening and kind of spreading out. These little small pock marks are kind of the first deterioration that shows up on the surface. But as we see kind of this black area, looks like it's indicating underlying moisture between the seal coat and the pavements. Again, this is Cedar Scenic kind of along this whole drive lane. And then this is a portion on that west part of Cedar Scenic where the seal coat is starting to give way or peeling off. We've been monitoring some research being done on the statewide level. In 2017, they examined possible causes. Was relatively, I'd say, inconclusive, where it said that stripping under chip seals is a complex phenomenon that cannot be addressed with a simple mix design or construction practice. Further research was ordered after this project was completed, and we've been tracking a research project of, is seal coating counterproductive or not? That was completed in December 2020 and recently released at the local road research board. They did analyze a lot of different aggregate types, different oils, different sizes, different construction techniques. and analyze those basically in relative performance to each other. And so there are things that the research says that could be done to possibly improve a seal coat's performance, but didn't really get to, I guess, a conclusion as to what is exactly causing that. The things that did come out of this research that seemed to match with what we're seeing in the city of Baxter is for premature stripping of asphalt under the seal coating, the effects of the freeze-thaw cycles, moisture damage, and asphalt loss is significant. And so as we're seeing more freeze-thaw cycles, that really weakens the bond between the seal coat and the underlying pavement. Moisture damage or moisture being trapped between the seal coat and the underlying pavements is causing a lot of damage. That's basically diluting the asphalt that holds these chips and the pavement together and starting the process of these potholes and damage to the underlying pavements. And as you can see from those photos, is once that damage occurs, the deterioration can accelerate through the chip seal and down into the pavement itself. Why is this of particular concern with Baxter? 70 to 80% of the city has a high groundwater table. And it appears that water, especially as it starts in the wheel path, or is being almost like pumped up and being trapped between the pavements and the seal coating. And again, that's diluting the asphalt that's holding all this together and weakening the bond between the two surfaces. The research showing the effects of multiple freeze-thaw cycles and how that significantly reduces the bond between the seal coats. We have seen that when temperatures in the lows in the upper 20s and highs in the 40s over an extended period of time. Rain during the winter months can be of particular damage to these areas. And then with it accelerating, you can kind of see when this finally breaks loose and isn't patched, and then these areas just kind of grow around it. So the research is kind of matching with some of those streets, particularly done in 2014. Ramifications of the pavement management plan. The city has also already had some pretty significant investment with some streets that, particularly with Knollwood Drive, that was constructed in 2013, seal coated in 2014, and then basically full depth reclamation and repavement in 2019 as part of the improvements with Jasperwood and that project in front of the middle school. Isle Drive, again, was constructed 2000, seal coated in 2015, proposed to be a full depth reclamation in 2021. Cedar Scenic Road, constructed in 2002, seal coated in 2014. So these streets obviously not meeting the pavement lives that the pavement management plan was hoping to achieve. Beyond that, the city has spent approximately $64,000 in patching and millings, isolated stripping areas, and then has spent about $7,500 in spray patching the last 3 years addressing this concern. So this, again, the deterioration accelerating in the pavement system. Again, we're coming down in the deterioration curve down here, whereas seal coats we're hoping to be able to every 7 years replace that surface, extend the life, and stretch out that time period between rehabilitation or reconstruction. With the pavement management plan, city would continue to crack seal according to its policy and patching. With what we're seeing, staff is recommending updating the management plan to basically discontinue the use of seal coating as a maintenance strategy. With the recent research really being inconclusive, and really no guaranteeing that this wouldn't continue to happen, really to look at other avenues to explore to extend the life of your pavements. Two things possibly to consider. Again, don't have any recommendations as to what the actual plan would be tonight, would be to adjust mill and overlays, probably in residential areas, to try and time those correctly to maintain a certain rating. There's also a maintenance activity called microsurfacing, which is basically a very thin pavement that's used to reseal surfaces. There is one community in the metro that has started to do this and would like to get in touch with them to get some more information. They're using it in combination with mill and overlays, again, to try and extend those pavement life. So there is a proposal in the amount of $12,700 for your consideration to take out the seal coating and update the plan to go in a different direction to try and extend the pavement life. Yes, with that, that is all I had. I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you. Trevor?
Mayor, you cut out, you're muted.
Trevor or Brad, have anything to add to what Brian just presented?
Mayor, City Council, the only thing I have to add is that, yes, on your agenda is 2 contracts with Bolton and Mink under consent. Like I say, and one is to look at this pavement management plan and see if we can come up with a different strategy to extend the pavement life so we're not doing full depth reclamations or reconstruction, which are the 2 very expensive maintenance projects in our pavement management program. You know, like I say, do we look at doing some microsurfacing every so many years, maybe do mill and overlays earlier so we're not into FDRs and reconstruction. And then the other contract that's on there is to update our GIS system and get our numbers current for the budget season coming up, and look at capital improvement plans.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, I think we need to, as a council, come up with what we think a proper rating or maybe a minimum rating for our streets will be. In talking with some people about this program, you know, I've been questioned on why do we need perfect streets? You know, there's a high price to that. I think those paying for the streets would be willing to, you know, drive over a few potholes. You know, and I know we don't want to get back to where we were with the streets department having, you know, a huge workload in filling potholes. But I don't think the city's going to be in favor of necessarily doing mill and overlays, which are expensive, at on a shorter time frame. So it's something we need to find a balance between the cost and the smoothness of the ride. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, John.
Brian, I just have kind of a question about the weight of vehicles play an impact on the deterioration at all, or on the significant impact of the stripping of the seal coating?
Councilmember Ward, we do not feel that it's if the surface underneath it is stable, that the weight of the traffic doesn't seem to be the underlying issue with the seal coating. It seems to be the moisture being in that section, and that weakening the bond, and then that leading to deterioration. Particularly with a lot of the commercial streets that were seal coated in 2017, we're not seeing as much deterioration in those as we are in some of the residential areas that were seal coated in 2014.
And were all the factors the same, like the same substance was put down, everything was apples to apples? As much?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the micro surfacing, that might be an option. How quickly can you find out the cost comparison between that and some of the other things we do? And I thought I heard you say that there were different cities that you could speak to.
Yes, there's one community in the metro that went away from seal coating. Is they've used, as I understand it, and I need more detail, but they've done this microsurfacing, which is basically a very thin, almost like a sand pavement resurfacing at year 7, and then to stretch out a mill and overlay beyond that, to basically try to fill that surface back in, reseal it, and extend that life out. The cost of microsurfacing, basically, from our past studies and such, seal coating was about $2 a square yard. Microsurfacing is about double that. And then the mill and overlays and such jump to around $17 a square yard. So that is really a jump between kind of a maintenance activity to more of a rehab activity.
Yeah, Mark?
A few years back, I know MnDOT did a section of 371 south of 210 with the micro resurfacing. It would be interesting to know how that worked out.
Yeah, Trevor brought that up the other day. Do you have any information on that, Trevor, on that stretch?
No, I don't, but we were gonna, if this contract gets approved, Brian's gonna be calling over to MnDOT and asking them, how has that performed and stuff in their opinion, and has it been a good product? So, yes. Well, what I see us doing is coming back with options, not coming back with the plan saying this is what we recommend changing to this plan. I think we'll come back with options first and review them with everybody, with Utilities Commission and City Council, and then we'll go back and rewrite the proposed plan and come back, for approval of the plan. So I think there'll be another step in here where council will weigh in on, this is what all the options are. These are ways that we could go with the pavement management plan. What route would you like to go?
Just a question. I don't know if you have the answer or not. With Baxter's water table and sandy soil, do you have any idea how our road surfaces compared to, say, Brainerd's as far as their lifetimes?
Yes, we have. We've been talking with Paul Sandy and the city of Brainerd. We've also talked with Crow Wing County. I should say Brian has. Brainerd has had really good luck with chip sealing, and so has the county on most of their road systems. They're only seeing mild stripping going on in certain areas. But Brainerd, like they said, they are mostly pure sand, but they don't have the high groundwater like we do. Paul said, you know, theirs has been holding up. He says he could see where Baxter is going to have a problem with that high groundwater, pretty much from about, you go right through the middle of Perch Lake, go down Industrial Park Road, kind of College Road, and draw that line all the way east and west through Baxter. Everything north of that is high groundwater. Everything south of that line is lower groundwater. The one that didn't make sense in that stripped, when you get to that theory, is Knollwood in front of Forest View Middle School.
Mm-hmm.
In Knollwood, there is the groundwater's down about 18 to 22 feet below the surface. And yet that stripped really bad, where it was getting to be pothole. We were pothole patching it every week. So I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns with chip sealing that have not been answered yet to date. And like I say, a lot of the cities in the metro area, and one in particular, Woodbury has discontinued it already many years ago. They had done so much damage in Woodbury to their streets that it's cost prohibitive, like they said, to keep going down this path.
Other thoughts or comments? Well, we're going to see it again in a few minutes on the consent agenda. So if there's any other discussion or thoughts you have by the time that comes, we can pull that too. But it's a bummer. It's just when we thought we had a clear ticket going there, it has not worked for us. And
Mayor, City Council, I think the one thing that we're going to look closely at is that microsurfacing. I mean, microsurfacing is cost effective if it will hold, you know, in high groundwater. And I don't know if there's been stripping problems or not with microsurfacing. And that is what a couple metro cities are going to, is the microsurfacing. And that's what Brian wants to do, is call down there. If he's going to come with a recommendation back, you know, of options, he's going to do his research by contacting those cities that have switched to that program. So, and see if it's working for them before we go down any other path.
any other comments, input? Okay, we will move on to Parks and Trails. I don't know how far we'll get here. If we get through, fine. If not, we'll attach it again in a couple of weeks here. Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just wanted to take the opportunity to share with the City Council a recommendation that came out of the Parks and Trails Commission. There's a memo in your packet that just briefly explains kind of the history on this, and the history goes back a little ways. It was a little over a year ago when the City Council had a joint meeting with the Parks and Trails Commission, and I attached that PowerPoint presentation to the packet just to try to refresh everyone's memory, because it's been over a year ago now since that meeting, and really the idea of the meeting was to just take an opportunity to review some of the past city planning efforts related to parks and trails, and really look at kind of the state of our parks and trails in terms of projects moving forward. I think what we were seeing is that the primary funding source for new parks facilities and some new trail facilities is our park dedication fund. and that fund was receiving kind of a lull in replenishment of that funding source. And so there was kind of a dip in the funding for new parks programs and or parks availability for new improvements. And so it was a good opportunity for everyone to analyze that, have a discussion with it. And one of the outcomes of that meeting was for the Parks and Trails Commission to try to narrow down priority projects. One of the things that was a discussion topic was what all the other types of possible funding sources are for parks projects. And we had a lot of discussion over a year ago on that. And so before we can discuss alternate funding possibilities for projects, it would be nice to kind of narrow down that scope, narrow down the priorities, and try to have a list that's smaller that we can work with, and then try to figure out how to fund projects, perhaps in different ways. So to kind of summarize this last year process, in working with the Parks and Trails Commission, they've had it on their agenda since the joint meeting, and they have quarterly meetings. They've had it on every one of their agendas, and they'd plug away at it and work at trying to develop a list. And there was really no definition of what the parks priority list was going to be. So it was just kind of freedom to try to get there to something they wanted to recommend to the council. There was no magic, it's got to be a top 10 list or a top 1 list or a top 3 list or anything like that. And I think after a lot of discussion, they settled on trying to do a top 10 list for parks facility improvements, and then a top 5 trail list. In the end, I think one thing that's very clear when it comes to new parks initiatives, it's a very individualized thing, and it's difficult to get agreement because parks projects, and there's so many different types of things you can do within a city park system and within trails. It's very difficult for everyone to come to agreement on what's the best idea for how to improve parks. And so it's that proved to be challenging, but I think after a lot of work, they did come up with a list that they recommended to the city council. And what we wanted to do was just introduce this tonight. I don't think we're under any pressure to act. There's nothing on the regular agenda related to the list, but just wanted to take an opportunity to share the list with the city council on what the Parks Commission recommended, see what discussion there is, see if there's any kind of discussion or agreement with the list, if there's different directions the council wants to take this. Ultimately, having a priority list or lists to get approved at some point, I think would be beneficial so that the city could then move forward with further planning efforts on individual parks projects. So I guess with that, I will stop. I'm going to try to share my screen so that the council can see the parks list. And I will do that right now. Can everyone see the parks list or not?
Yes.
Okay. So, I can go through these individually, Mayor, or I don't know if the council would rather use your remaining time to discuss it. I guess I'd look to you, just given we don't have a lot of time left. There's a top 12 list. I would only add that there are stars next to, or asterisks next to, the top 7 items on the parks improvement list. And the idea with the asterisks was, it's a top 12 list. That's a lot of projects. Can we narrow this down? The Parks Commission was honestly struggling with how to rank them in priority order. That was proving to be a difficult task. Maybe direction is, sorry, but you got to prioritize them. But at this point, I think the asterisks help them get to a point of being able to make a recommendation, which was to say, okay, these 7 projects are of more priority than projects 8 through 12. So that's what the asterisks meant with their recommendation. So when you look at items 1 through 7 on the list, they're not in any ranked order. So 1 is not more important than 7. 1 and 7 are all on equal terms. And then items 8 through 12 are on the next level of priority. And then they chose not to do asterisks with the top 5 trails list. So I guess with that, I'll stop and see what the council thinks about that. And we're looking for any direction from the council. If there's more information you'd like on these projects, happy to dive into it deeper too.
The council, do you have any specific questions or?
I do.
I can't. Yeah, I can't see it. Go ahead.
Josh, this is Councilor Ward, Josh. I don't know if you can see us or not.
Yes, I can.
So how did they decide? You said that was the Park Commission that came up with the priorities or 1 through 7. What kind of criteria did they use to, decipher, find, number 1 is beginner mountain bike, fat tire bike course. When I read the report, that was one of the things I was wondering is who decided the criteria, who selected, the ones that were top priority, and what was the criteria?
Yeah, really good question. I would say this. I think I think most of the parks commissioners were familiar with a lot of parks planning efforts that happened with the 2015 comp plan, where we did a very elaborate parks and trails chapter of the plan and set a lot of goals. So some of the projects that are on that list have that history of being through a past planning practice that involved the community greatly. Some of them are new. Some of them are new that were new ideas that have come up. And some of them are even older ideas from previous to our last comp plan update of 2015. So in terms of a specific criteria, we did not develop a criteria except to try to organize the commissioners' interest in various projects. I know in working on these agenda items over the last year, we tried to, as a staff, help guide the commission by tallying how much interest there was on one particular project over another between commissioners. But in terms of a defined criteria and ranking system, it was individualized interest and how much consensus interest there was amongst the Parks and Trails commissioners. So no specific criteria beyond that.
Thank you.
What I was wondering, Josh, with the indulgence of the rest of the council, if in the time we've got left, if you could just go through those 7 and just give us, to John's point, maybe some bullet points, what they were thinking and.
Sure. Yeah, so starting from the top, the beginner mountain bike fat tire bike course, I think that is a new item that hadn't surfaced in the past. That is not on any past planning documents. I think if I could provide a bullet point, I think the impetus for that was really all of this new open space land that we have in Southwest Baxter that provided a new opportunity there. And so that is really the bullet point on that. It's a new opportunity that we didn't have previously, and everyone seemed to have interest. The Mississippi River Overlook Park Area Master Plan, I think they were hesitant to put this on the list because the council has provided past support of earmarking money within the budget to complete this study. I think there's, but they didn't want it not on the list because they wanted to recognize the importance of studying this land in Southwest Baxter and make sure that stays as a priority. So that stayed on the plan or on the list for that reason. Pickleball courts, quite frankly, the Parks Commission received a presentation from an interest group that was advocating for pickleball courts in the city. I think the council's heard about that in the past, and we had there were lots of different options requested by this individual group that just categorized just a lot of interest around pickleball and hopeful of improvements within the city of Baxter. so that people don't have to travel so far to some of the other communities that have those facilities. And talking about it being a real gathering place and a use that, quite frankly, they're very confident would get used a lot. And so the Parks Commission interest is based on presentation by user groups that represent the sport. In terms of the fourth one, acquisition development of county land near Whipple Beach, that's referring to land around on the opposite side of Oakwood, as it relates to the property kind of outside of the beach and the beach parking lot area. So the county land that surrounds Whipple Beach. They're very interested in the possibility of that land, as that's one of our most frequented facilities in our park system. Dog park, the dog park's been talked about for many years, and there's been a lot of interest around that. There's been emails in the past, I know, that have come into the city, and phone calls. When we get those, we share those with the Parks Commission. It's just kind of one of those parks improvement uses that seems to keep coming up amongst individual community members. And so, and the Parks Commission has certainly not forgotten about that interest and wanted that on the list. Item 6, yard games and parks. I think that was an idea that was floated internally, and I think they really like the idea. There's some challenges with doing yard games. How do you check out equipment, or do you just build some of the functional pieces of it and people have to kind of bring their own, depending on the yard game, that kind of thing. But there's interest in it because it's potentially a lower cost improvement and something that they feel the community might really like. And there's no long history of that idea. That was fairly new. In terms of number 7, road access and parking lot improvements at Mississippi River Overlook Park, that involves this new open space property we have. That has been on a priority in the comprehensive plan of 2015. A very stated priority was to expand open space and to improve access to that open space. Presently, we have a trailhead that's at the end of a dead-end street in Oakdale Road within a neighborhood. And there's interest in maintaining that priority level from the comp plan, but also a renewed interest in that because we've expanded the amount of land that we have in Southwest Baxter. And as use increases there, to not have a road to a parking lot is something that's of interest by the commission. So I don't know if that helps, Mayor, but that's kind of my Cliff Notes kind of explanation on what I know of their thoughts on those items.
Yeah, I think it does, and especially for newer people to know what some of the thought processes were there. So that's good to hear. I appreciate the work that group does, and their hearts and minds are into this really diligently. And I know in better times, when we had a little more development going and more park dedication fees, they had a fund source to use, and it was easier, quote unquote, to do some of those things. Now it's a little bit different, and so I appreciate all of their thoughts and time that they put into that. We're a few minutes out from the council meeting. If nobody else has anything else to say, I would look for an adjournment. And
Mr. Mayor, I have one more question for Josh on this issue.
Yep.
Well, thank you. So Josh, I looked at the plan, I read the plan. Is there anywhere in the plan, I did not see anything that, a dollar figure was tied to each of these projects? Is there anywhere where there's a dollar figure tied to any of this? Each individual project?
Yeah, good question. Some of them we've taken and put together estimates. For example, we did an estimate on a dog park years back, just preliminary estimates. And some of them, no. The newer ideas we have not. And really it depends on, a lot of these projects are not shovel ready and need some more of that work to determine cost and scope. And so by getting to the point where the council can recognize a priority list And if it's this list, great. If it's a different list, that's fine too. But once we can formally recognize a list, then we can hopefully start to continue our work with the Parks Commission to try to further some of those estimates, explore other funding opportunities, get it on our website so the community can know what the priorities are of the city from a Parks and Trails perspective, those kind of things. So to answer your question, no, I would say that most of them don't have detailed cost estimates that are ready to go. We have more work to do.
That's a good question. Okay, again, I'd look for a motion to adjourn the workshop. Okay, now I can see people.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Ward,
Second.
second by Councilmember Tabbitt. Any other discussion? Roll call?
Cross. Licio,
Yes.
Tabbitt,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Olson.
And yes, and we will be